Hi, everyone. Welcome to our first fireside chat, MustardHub Voices Beyond the Build, where we talk with people building, backing, and running better workplaces. I'm your host, Curtis Forbes. My guest today is Matt Posey. He's a seasoned professional with over 25 years in the business technology space. He's worked for small boutique firms up to some biggies like Capgemini. He's presently a senior business developer at Wipfli. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm glad you could be here. So tell me, what is Wipfli? What kind of companies or clients do you work with there?
Yeah, kudos on the pronunciation. Most people get it wrong, so thank you for nailing that. We're basically a top 20 advisement firm, so tax, accounting, audit, those kind of things, but also largely in technology, which is kind of where my background comes from. About 3,500 of us, mostly in the middle of the country. We're based out of Wisconsin, but we've got big offices here in Minneapolis, where I am, in Chicago. Folks kind of scattered to the wind as well, but we usually work with manufacturing and distribution companies, but we do a lot with, nonprofits, and we do some government and some casinos and tribal accounting, things like that. So most of our company clients that we work with are about 5 million to up to about 500 million. We have some bigger ones than that, but that's probably the purple patch or the sweet spot we play in. So those are kind of the three main columns, right? We got kind of financial services, auditing, and then technology.
You mentioned that you came from the technology world, and you have kind of an interesting path that led you into a business development role. I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I kind of soup to nuts it. Started way back when. I won't say how long ago, but many moons ago. I guess we did math on 25 years, but 25 years ago, I was a business analyst. Started with kind of requirements gathering and working on companies we had acquired and putting them onto our current corporate stack. And then worked my way up through, project management, program management, engagement management, and then practice management. I really enjoyed kind of the longer I did it, the more sort of horizontal I got, because then I could help people across more than just one sort of finite space. About 4 years ago, I kind of enjoyed what I was doing, but I said, I think the sales side of this might be a little more fun, because I can kind of talk turkey about these problems and sort of solution around them during these discussions, and not have to kind of engage and live through the whole project. So I get to help more people a little more quickly that way.
It's awesome. You just said something I think that really struck me. I mean, in business development, you're not just selling things, but you're helping companies solve problems. So, I mean, I'm a little curious to hear, what kind of problems are you really obsessed with solving for your clients? I mean, what kind of solutions do you typically suggest to help folks solve these, whatever they happen to be?
Yeah, I think, for us at Wipfli, what we typically see is scale, right? Hey, we've outgrown some of these technologies, or we've never had really refined processes, or we're going to acquire a company. That's probably the largest one we can help with. It's not just one piece of the puzzle. Usually it's not just, hey, we're on QuickBooks and we need to replace it with this other piece of technology now all of a sudden. It's usually, hey, we've got a bunch of things across the breadth and depth of our entire operation that we need to maybe tune around or tune up to do some things. Like a good example, we work with distribution companies that want to become manufacturers quite often. And a lot of that is, hey, you're going to grow into some new areas that you haven't historically had. And some of that's technology, some of that's people, some of that's processes. So being able to solve those problems around scale is probably the biggest one we do. I'd say second is probably inefficiency. Look, we've got modern technology. We know we've left a lot of money on the table with automation. We've waited too long to invest in some of these things. And we know this tool and technology can help us understand what the best piece of that is, or what the sort of value realization we can get out of making this switch is. So trying to connect those dots.
I mean, in your work, how often do you see people challenges get in the way of progress, right? You've talked a lot about the technology factor, right? And maybe some of the systems, hard systems that the organizations might use to help scale. What kind of things do you see people get in the way of?
Absolutely. 100% of what we do involves people.
Yeah.
And some of the problems, going too fast, right? A lot of times people, hey, we want to do this, we want to go way too fast. And at the end of the day, some of these changes we're implementing, it's like, you guys, this is going to be your baby, right? You're going to have to feed and water this thing. And sometimes they just want to go too fast. Or
Yeah.
we see some folks that are just unrealistic with some of the stuff they can get, hey, we want to do this in a month. It's like, it's not going to happen that quickly. So trying to help them understand, you're still going to have day jobs as you go through some of these changes. Some things may change personnel wise, usually not somebody losing their job, but they're getting either, hey, they're going to do more or less of something, or there's a particular sort of valve you guys are going to have to control that historically someone hasn't had to kind of sit there and watch as much. So getting kind of identification around users, what they're going to do, their roles and responsibilities, and then just overall change management. I mean, just moving people's cheese is, a problem we have to deal with and explain. So some people are more comfortable with others or than others than when they have to change some of those things around. Some of these people have worked at these companies for forever, decades. And, we've seen a lot of problems from, some folks are understanding, hey, from the spectrum of AI, we kind of know what that is, all the way down to I still have guys that think the battery pack on their laptop is the mouse. So everything in between there, we have to try to help, guide them and coach them and help them along.
Well, I mean, what would you say is a common people related issue that your clients maybe don't realize is connected to their tech or ops, marketing sales problem?
I think the fear and uncertainty and doubt around change is something people maybe don't understand, right? They may have, hey, we're going to have this one particular person lead us through this or champion this technology, but getting the rest as sort of the herd to follow, that's one we see quite a bit with, because
Yeah.
people are very timid. They've always done it one way or they've always done it this way, right? And then also there's cultural changes when you start changing some of the measurement tools that these technologies can provide or these processes can do, right? The error tracking and things like that. People get real uncomfortable about that because they're used to being like the man with the plan, or the lady that was in charge of all of it, and you're kind of changing some of the keyboard they have, or the things they're looking at. So again, a little bit, a little more fear, and people can get frustrated because they're used to being the answer guy or gal, and
Yeah.
now they're having to rely on something else. They're going, I feel like I'm in the dark on some of this stuff because some of it's new or some of it's changed or some of it
Yeah.
isn't the way I'm used to. So that cultural engagement of embracing the change and then trusting kind of the advisors to help us along, that's probably the biggest hurdle we have to climb. And that can be around anything, right? I'm kind of using a technological example, but I mean, accounting people, right? You're sending numbers to people you don't know. So some
Yeah.
people are scared about that, or just openly communicating about stuff. Some people think, it's kind of like going to the doctor. Like, I'm not going to tell them everything, but they're surprises when you don't do that. And so getting that trust to kind of get built earlier on, we often see better results when people are just open and honest with us. And that's a cultural change for some of these folks as well, because they're closely held or family owned companies. And sometimes it takes them a cycle or three before they go, okay, these guys do know what they're doing, so I am going to tell them about this problem we got.
I think it can force a change in personal process when there are different measurement mechanisms, also, right? So when you start to implement that change, right, it forces people out of that comfort zone and they have to do their own things differently because they're looking at it through that new lens.
Absolutely.
So
Absolutely.
that makes a lot of sense. Now, out of curiosity, as you help find solutions to problems like this, I mean, what have you typically observed about how teams succeed or struggle when they're finally implementing these things, right? So there's that fear before it happens. Now the change is there.
Yeah. How much time we
How do the good ones
got?
how do the good ones do it?
It's interesting, right? And I would say there's some variables. One is trying to have as many people in the sales cycles. You don't have to have everyone, but that
Mhm.
continuous sort of engagement with people from the earlier point in the process before they start the project can help
Yeah.
bridge that gap, right? That comfort comes faster. Not always something you can do. So to use your example, hey, we're kind of in the midst of this. We're starting. Everyone's still a little bit kind of standoffish because just don't know what this, or they weren't involved in the sales cycle. So like, who's this Mac guy? Who's this this other guy that's coming with them? building trust and rapport early and often is usually what ends up helping our side of it, right? And then having the opposite be true on sort of the client side is be as honest and transparent as you guys can be. Even if you did this a certain way or you think that's the only way it can do it, we do this all day, every day. And if you give us something, we may have a more contextualized understanding and be able to solve it way better. Because what a lot of these happen is where the element of surprises, right? It's easier to change and adapt to changes earlier on. As you go through and get further, those surprises can become very frustrating, and sometimes you have to go back to not exactly square one, but maybe square two or three, and kind of re-implement. Say, hey, if we had known this, or if we had talked about this earlier, or if you'd explained this more clearly, we could have done a little bit of easier steering. That also changes the team because the team dynamic on the client side, right? These people have worked together a long time. That culture of, I hate to say accountability because it sounds like, hey, we're just all measuring each other. It's not quite an accountability, but there is a inflection or pivot point as you go through these projects where they start to engage more. And that's where the earlier that happens, the clients tend to be more successful because it's our system, it's our team, it's our, sort of
Yeah.
project now. It's not just, hey, we're just checking boxes and turning this on and let us know when you're done with it.
That's interesting, and it kind of answers my next question. And you can kind of see that subtle culture layer that that sort of separates the high performing teams, or maybe even some of those organizations that that you might admire how they went about making some of those changes. You've worked with a really wide range of sizes of organizations, right? Of sizes of companies. Um, I'm curious, do you see any major differences between some of the smaller companies versus some of the bigger ones, and how they go about doing that? And maybe how some of them, on that spectrum can consistently execute compared to those that maybe, flounder. Is there a big difference, or are those, is the recipe the same?
I'll explain it this way. The concepts are the same, right? The concepts are the same, meaning a small company or a large company, they have the same fears, concerns, and things like that. They may be different fears and concerns for a smaller company versus a larger company, meaning, hey, we've had someone at a larger company that's done one of these before, but my concern this time is this change or this concern, right? The smaller companies have those same concerns, but they may have a more holistic concern over, hey, we've never done one of these before. So not only have we kind of stepped into deeper water than we're used to, but now we've got the change component against it, right? There's commonality in where these things fall apart, right? And a lot of them fail when people just aren't, clear and concise with requirements. That's one area, right? Another is, there's not engagement. So they're just, yes, yep, that's good enough. And then when you get to testing or sort of the data validation, data cleansing, you start to run into problems because it's like, hey, this is a surprise, or this is something we didn't talk about. That earlier pivot inflection point where that trust and that sort of trusted advisor status is earlier. And that's both ways, right? Trusted advisor status isn't just us coming in, it's who's a trusted advisor on their side. And
Yeah.
if we
Okay.
all trust each other, we can get more
Well,
miles and smiles out of that.
talk to me more about what you mean when you say engagement. Are these organizations and leadership within that company working with Wipfli, or is it their organization as a whole, leadership, and on down, and how they communicate with each other to implement these changes? Or is it both?
It's easy answer is both, right? And there's kind of microcosms because you have two teams and you have leadership and engagement on both sides.
Right.
The client engagement sort of side with executive or engagement manager, whatever role you want to call it. The earlier that happens and the deeper they get, the better these things tend to go, right? There's some things because my boss is doing it, so most people care about what their boss cares about, and that gets that early engagement and some buy-in earlier, and you avoid sort of the seagull effect where they can fly in and do some damage because they haven't been involved at a tactile level. So steering committees, constant communication around status and things like, it doesn't have to be necessarily weekly. We try to do weekly on ours just because we move fast. But longer engagement, sometimes you have those sponsorship sort of stakeholdery sort of discussions,
Mm.
every other week or once a month, depending on the size or sort of the sort of focus on speed.
I'd love to touch a little bit on the tech and people systems, and specifically some of this workforce, technology. Are you seeing any kind of interesting changes in how companies now are using software to support their people?
Oh yeah.
Or I guess, or ops, especially with all the changes that have happened in the last, 18 to 24 months. It's like night and day.
Yeah, it's interesting. I see quite a lot of change around just people management, and I don't just mean from an HR system perspective, but
Right.
a lot of the concerns that we get brought to us are around data, and not just how do we get data, but how do I communicate this data across, right? There's a lot of distraction. There's a lot of bells and whistles you can turn on, and all these systems to email you and call you and text you, and all these things can happen. And so, trying to come up with a concise communication management plan on top of some of this technology is a big change for people. I mean, that's something we're constantly battling is how do I get this to my people? And I may have field service folks that are out, and not
Yeah.
being able to be in front of a keyboard and a computer all the time to I'm an executive and I don't really need to live in the system, but I need to be able to get data that I can make decisions with and then communicate with as well. So that engagement is always something we're having to figure out and realize. AI is the big hot button right now. Everybody's talking about AI, but a lot of our clients are like, "Hey, we understand what that is, and we kind of know what it does. We're not there yet. We're still here, and we're still trying to figure out. Hey, we
Yeah.
have, we're going from like no employee sort of handbook kind of stuff. We're tracking some of these compliance needs now, and how do I communicate? Hey, your certificate on this is now expiring. So it's quite a gamut. It's quite a gamut.
You made a comment about data that I want to kind of go back to and just lean into a little bit. When it comes to the data, there's a lot of noise out there, and there are a lot of companies. There is a lot of AI out there that that are frankly right. Big data systems, and I'm curious if you see a gap between what's actually measured and really what matters.
Huge gap. Huge gap.
I
One problem,
figured as much.
one problem is if you want to use AI, you got to have good data, right?
Yeah.
So that's one problem we're solving with a lot of like walk us through your data. You can't even really. This thing's going to hallucinate. It's going to give you all these weird answers because it's only got this data to work from. And if it's bad
Mhm.
data, guess what? You get bad answers, right? So that's
Yeah.
one piece of it. Two is trying to figure out to your point, like, hey, we're making what we measure, but what do we need to measure? And then, or are we doing that right? Are we not doing that right? Sometimes there is some pride of ownership with that because this is what I've always
Yeah.
tracked and this is what I've always spit out. But you go and, you benchmark against, some of the clients we have, we can go in and do benchmark data and say, hey, this is where you score against your peers, right? We have
Yeah.
$30 billion worth of production data that we can go and plug you in against and say, this is kind of where the KPIs for what you guys do. And this is what makes the needle move the most. And some of that's easily consumable because they're kind of ready, and some of it's like we have to kind of hold some hands and help them with it because, to your point, data's data. What does
Yeah.
that mean? And for different
Exactly.
industries, different companies, that can mean a bunch of different stuff, right?
Okay, so if you had a magic dashboard and that could show you one people signal inside of a company, what would you want to see?
That is a great question. Um, I don't know if I could get it down to one.
Okay,
I would
you can
love to
do
have
two.
one.
You're
Yeah,
allowed. You're allowed to do two.
it's boy, and my mind's going in a billion different ways because we do so many different kinds of companies. Um, Manufacturing perspective, I think it's going to be just turn and burn style KPI. Like, hey, who's doing the most? Who's doing the least? How do we get the least to do more like the most? How do we track that production? Because you live and die by your production floor, right? So
Yeah.
that probably be the one I said, hey, that's the big one for me. I have some very smart manufacturing people like, that's a dumb one, Matt. Here's a way better one. But from my perspective, and usually the problems we've drilled into once they've kind of adapted some of this technology, that's the one you just continually chase.
So, and I'm guessing Wipfli could really build any of those things. Yeah.
We do. I mean, a lot of off the shelf can help you do that. It's the interpretation of that's where the advisement comes from, right? You can turn this thing on and vacuum as much data as you want, but the interpretation of that, or how do I know that's good or bad, that's where the kind of the magic is.
I love that you're helping these organizations kind of understand their needs, understand how to get their teams engaged so that everybody can be on the same page to implement some of these things, help understand how to measure the progress, right? Tell me a story about a team or a client, you don't have to use their name, or you can if you want, that you've worked with that has had a major people breakthrough or breakdown,
I've
or
got
maybe
a
even
great,
both.
yeah, I've got a breakdown one for you. It's a great one. I'll try to keep it short because there's a very long timeline on this thing. There's a company
Okay.
out of Spokane. I won't say their name, but they made rugged laptops, and this was early 2000s. I
Okay.
was
Way
flying from
back.
Atlanta to Seattle every week, which is 12 hours door to door. It took me 12 hours to get there. And I was gone there 8, 9 months, right? It's millions of dollars worth of work. They had a team of us. I don't know. This is not a Wipfli example, but I'm just going to give you an example from
Yeah,
my
yeah,
past that
sure.
I think is applicable. I just want to make sure. They were like, "Oh, Wipfli did that." No, this is not a Wipfli example, but it was a good. Bad examples are good examples. So all this travel, months, millions of dollars, team. I think we had a baker's dozen of us, 13, 14 people. Went through this whole thing, got it all ready. The week before we were supposed to go live, they got a new CTO and a new CFO. The
Wow.
week before we were supposed to go live. And the first day we came in, the week before, that Monday, we all get in there. And the CFO came in and was like, "Yep, we're not going to do this thing. We're shutting it all down, and we're moving everything to Florida. We're not going to use any of this stuff." And that the
Wow.
the my mind instantly went to like, what kind of conversations did they have? Because I mean, this was a big, you know, monthly bill they were writing checks for, and the real challenge. And I asked a couple of conversations before we kind of all went home. It's like, how did you guys get to this, or what happened, what changed? And it was literally they had no conversations at all about it. So the
Oh.
project team that was kind of siloed that was working on this thing didn't the new incoming CFO. I don't think there was any culture handoff. I don't know if they had like, what are we trying to build? What's the philosophy around this? What growth are we trying to get? And they just came in and said, yeah, we're just not going to use it. And
Wow. I mean, going back to what you were saying, and regardless of size, the trust, the communication, the alignment, those important pieces of the engagement to move mountains, to move these kind of things forward. When you don't have any of that, this is kind of what happens.
It, I mean, it was a super disappointing time. It broke my heart because we spent so much time. And I mean, at that, we don't do it quite to this way today, but it was basically one to one. You had like, I had my client side peer, and he and I were in rooms writing stuff and whiteboarding and test. I mean, it was heartbreaking to watch it just get turned off because he spent, I mean, a year of his career at this company building this thing that they're just like, yeah, we're not going to do it.
Wow, wow. Well, maybe that's an answer to this, which is something that's sort of been on my mind. I'm curious if you have a lesson that you've learned that maybe has nothing to do with tools or strategy, just human behavior related.
Yeah, for me, the secret is the helping. The secret is focus on the problems, right? Coming in and trying to sell widgets or feature fight or say this system can do these things. It's really, what problems are you having? Walk me through what you've tried before. What do you think this will look like if you solve it? Those are the ones that really move the needle and make the most difference, not only from a tools, technology, process perspective, but from a trust and sort of rapport perspective, right? I want to help you solve this stuff. Help me help you. That to me, and it took me a while to get there because I was like, I work for these companies with the greatest technology. It's great. It doesn't matter if it doesn't solve the problem. And even if you can kind of solve the problem, you can, they have to trust that you can do that, right? Just saying it, great. Everyone's going to say what they can do. But getting that trust early because I care about you and I want to help you solve this problem, that to me has been the biggest, secret sauce component that kind of light bulb went on. And I want to tell you how late in my career that kicked on because it took me a while. I'm a slow learner. I'm a complete learner, but I'm a slow learner. But once that kind of kicked in, and people get nervous about these things, or they're
Yeah.
concerned we're changing too much too fast. Once you can kind of get back to that and focus back on that, it tends to make everybody feel a lot better. They feel partnership. They feel you care about them.
Do
And
you
we do.
feel do you feel that consistency through the organizations that you worked with before Wipfli, and also, I mean, you've been at Wipfli about 9 months now or so. You feel that consistency really kind of throughout, the organizations that you've worked with throughout your career.
Here, yes. Other organizations, no.
Okay.
And that was one of the differences I noticed, right? Having worked at some that were very, very warm, I guess is a good term. That were essentially extensions of the client team, which everybody says they are, but
Yeah.
that proof is in the pudding. And watching some of the companies I did work at, and it wasn't always just company wide, but some of the teams that got put together, it's a very different, philosophy. And if it's not there, if it's missing, boy, is that a rough road.
Yeah.
That's a rough road. And there's, variables on top of that where the project team, that core, like the previous example I was going to Spokane, that project team had it, but I don't think it had bled over to the engagement or executive side of that company. And that's why I think they're like, yeah, we're fine. I don't think anybody said, how long do you spend on this? How do you feel about it? Do you think this will work? Do you think it's not going to work? I don't think any of that happened. And,
Yeah.
shame on them for not doing that. But that certainly, that's a core DNA. It's not coachable. That
Yeah.
focus on client helping and rapport and really caring about companies. That's in clients. That's DNA and that's culture. And that's when they say it's culture can eat strategy. That is the difference from what I've seen. I know there's a bunch of different other strategies and cultures and things that exist in there, but when I feel that missing or start to notice that getting smaller in the organization, that's when most of the problems come. That's when we see a lot of these things go off the track.
What do you think, speaking directly to that topic, what do you think this next generation of leaders needs to understand about people and culture that maybe today's leaders don't?
It's interesting. I was just at a conference this week for emerging leaders in this association we're a member of, and AI, of course, was spoken about, but the communication strategy, the curation of having the right people in the right chair or being able to coach, we spent a lot of time talking about that, which is interesting. I mean, you're talking technology side to people side. I mean,
Mm.
almost like how do we not necessarily manage people? How do we communicate to some of these people, right? And I got real excited because I'm one of the older guys in the room. I'm not afraid to say it because it was a emerging. I'm a little past my spring chicken emerging phase, but to hear some of these companies and they've owned them. These are third or fourth generation company owners, right? My
Mhm.
dad owned a grandpa. Hearing them talk through that, and some of these are warehouse level, not sophisticated jobs, all the way up to, hey, we have these technology company folks that we're using. Hearing them how they're concerned and how they're trying to communicate and work through, I think that's going to become way more important because the tools are the tools, right? AI is going to be AI, tech's going to be the tech, all that's going to get improved and get better over time. But the way you manage people and communicate with people, that's where I think a lot of companies are going to struggle if they don't get it right. I think they're going to retaining people is going to be hard. Finding new people is going to be hard. Continuing to grow, which everybody business wants to do, I think is going to be harder unless you know how to kind of build that culture of exchange and not just, hey, we just go by the data purely and nothing else. Yes, you want data, it's important, but that that leadership style and open communication and sort of, I don't want to say servant leadership, I don't want to label whatever the future is going to be, but
Yeah.
that approach seems to be what everyone's going towards because they're like, hey, I was losing people or people were getting burnt out and I really need to understand why. And those sort of conversations need to happen for them to make changes. It's not just a data specific sort of spitting out number sort of thing.
I think that, well, I mean, first of all, that makes perfect sense, and certainly the way that work life has evolved, I think, over the last 50 to 70 years. Today's world, and a lot of the younger generation really want their work to be meaningful, to feel that it's meaningful, and that it moves people, or if it's appreciated. And a lot of times they're not going to know without somebody telling them, right? Or getting that kind of feedback. And feedback isn't necessarily always, an individual telling you, right? There's a lot of ways that we can get feedback, but unless we're getting that feedback, oftentimes then, might not feel it's as meaningful as it could be. And we might then want to go seek out something that's more meaningful. I'm curious though, as you see your work evolving, as companies get more intentional, excuse me, how do you see your work evolving as companies get more intentional about their people?
It's it's a great question. It's changed a lot because it's not just I'm the representation of a tool anymore. Now it's how is this going to provide me value for not just myself and the company, but for the users of this? How do I get them to adopt this better? Have you seen us struggle around areas you've seen other clients struggle around? So it's I hate to, it's kind of almost therapy like, because it's like, tell me your problems. Let me understand what it is. You're not alone. We've seen this before. Here's kind of how we solve that. But that part of it, I don't think was as prevalent. I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. Maybe COVID was the change on that, and maybe it's just kind of going that way, and COVID just happened to be kind of a coincidental sort of happening. But that's kind of where I feel like I started to bring that more to the table, because it was more important to people. It was like, yeah, we can use Excel or whatever for this thing, but walk us through the customer experience on this, and then not only from a use perspective, but from a people management and how we engage and how this is going to make their lives better, right? A lot of this, people are very scared they're just going to lose their job. They're like, oh, consultants are coming in, they're going to change some technology. I have yet to see a project lose anyone's job that I've worked on. It usually just changes and say, hey, instead of doing 2 locations, now I can do 4 because I have more efficiency with this tool. But that's always a concern we have to get around. And so that that sort of hand holding or rapport building or expectation management, that's way more important than it used to be. And
Yeah.
everyone seems to be doing that. There's a company here or 3, but they don't care. But I'd say 99% of the companies I speak with about anything we do, that's a component to what it is.
Yeah.
And that's something they make sure we talk about.
What is a misconception that business owners or executives you think still have about people dynamics?
Oh boy, people aren't coin operated. Just because you put coins on them or feed them something, it doesn't make them better.
Yeah.
I hate to pull it back to technology, but a lot of this is like, it's a tool. It's not going to
Yeah.
magically fix everything, and it's not going to train all your people and make them better. You still need to invest the time in the people. Like late 2000s, everybody's just going hard on technology, just
Yeah.
plugging everything in, turning everything on, and
Yeah.
then a lot of the biggies and even some of the Fortune 50, 500, they kind of turn around like, this didn't really get us what we wanted. And in a
Yeah.
lot of ways, it's kind of worse than we thought, because now we've plugged all this stuff outside of our people, and we're missing some of the tribal knowledge, or, our DNA, our secret sauce. So I think that kind of started to come back into focus, where people are like, it's got to be a balance. It has to be people and whatever we're changing together. And we need to make sure we retain that people component and zero in on the people to make sure we're not completely screwing them up. But just trying to plug people with coin operated or turn up the tap just to make them go faster, I think that's still a misconception for a lot of companies we work with.
If you could give some advice, one piece, if I'm a business leader and you could give me a piece of advice and I'm trying to really get it right with my people, what would you tell me? What would be that thing?
It's open and honesty, right? Be
Yeah.
open and honest, and make sure everyone gets to see the big picture, right?
Yeah.
When you got this stuff siloed, there's so many people that are so smart, but if you keep them in the silo, you're going to have problems. If you let them see the bigger picture, they may come up with hey, I actually, this is a better way to do this. Or if I had known I needed that piece of this, I would have done it this different way. And it oftentimes, unfortunately, it doesn't happen until we start getting engaged in projects that we do where those kind of conversations start to come out. You don't have to wait for a project for that to come out. You can sit down and say, hey guys, let's talk through this. Do you understand what the next steps of this process are when you do this? And most people are like, no, I just do this. So getting that larger contextual, open, transparent communication, that's probably the biggest factor I see. And I try to preach about that as much as I can. Even if you guys don't do this product, even if you don't go with us, make sure you guys have those conversations, please, because it's going to make a lot of this different. Because some companies come and say, hey, you want to change the system? And you sit down and go, guys, technology is not going to fix this. You've got this particular people problem, or you just aren't talking about stuff. And even if we gave you the greatest tool on earth and you aren't talking, it's not going to work.
How would you tailor that same kind of, I mean, you work with companies that are doing millions, tens of millions, potentially hundreds of millions a year. Would you tailor that advice differently if you were talking to a small business of 10 people, 20 people, with teams that small?
It's just the amount of times you do it. With a company that's 12, 10 people, maybe one conversation. With a company that's 500 million, 700 million, you may have to have that conversation as you go up the organizational chart, right? But the concept's the same. That same concept of, hey, when you're doing this, make sure you understand the larger picture, or they have the context of it, because they're going to come up with better ideas because they're actually see it. They're going to come back and say, hey, I was thinking about this. I noticed this. Now that I know we do this operation thing outside of the output of what I do, I think I can do this better.
Yeah. Have there been anything, or has there been anything in your personal life that has really affected your work and your perception of work and people and all of that, kind of contextually?
Oh boy, a lot. For me personally, the big light bulb for me was just being myself with a lot of this stuff. For a long time, you're trying to run, scared or ahead of a client, and you're just trying to, make them feel good. Just be honest and say, guys, this is an area I know this, or I know that. I'm trying to bridge the gap on understanding it. Tell me a little bit more about it. Instead of like, yeah, we can do this. And then you try to go figure out and come back and like, man, I should have asked some questions, or I didn't really fully understand that. That's a biggie for me, because that's when that rapport and trust just went through the roof. Before, it was like, yeah, we like Matt. He's a good guy. He's got a pretty okay beard. He can help us figure this out. Off we go. It might take us 3 or 4 times. But when I just stopped and took that hat off, it's like, I'm a human being. They're a human being. They're probably worried about this, or tell me what you're concerned about, or what have you always had at this organization that you wish you had and we haven't asked you about. Those kind of things, that's what makes it more complete for me. So that's probably the biggest one. I mean, there's a bunch of other personal learnings and shortcomings in there I don't have time to get into today, but that's the biggie, I think, is being myself and just being open and honest with the problems they're trying to solve.
Well, I'm fairly certain that beard has to be responsible for at least 1 or 2 promotions. So no doubt about that. But Matt, I really appreciate it today. I appreciate you joining us. I appreciate all the insight, and all the expertise, and all just like the general warm, meaningful, and honest conversation. It's super insightful.
Well, I'm glad you let me talk at you for a while and spit out, my sort of interpretation of all this from my perspective. So thanks for giving me the time.
Yeah, of course. I just want to say, to everybody listening, thanks for tuning in to MustardHub Voices Behind the Build. If you got something out of this conversation, share it with a friend or teammate. Check out mustardhub.com to see how we help companies become destinations for workplace happiness and can turn culture into a competitive edge. Until next time, thank you.